park manager called me and he says, have a position that we'd like you to come work for us in Vantage, Washington.
Yeah.
And I thought, Vantage, Washington. Okay, I'm not familiar with it, but okay. And I said, can you kind of describe the area? And he says, well, it's sort of a dry desert environment. Well, Brandon, you have to understand that my experience in Washington has only been Western Washington. And so my interpretation, if you will, of what he shared was, that must be like a dry pine forest or something like that.
Hey, Islanders, and welcome to episode 135 of the Camano Voice. Today I speak with the retired regional director for Washington State Parks. Please welcome Eric Watilo. Hi, I'm Brandon Erickson, and you're listening to the Camano Voice podcast, where I interview local business owners, comedians, singers, and more. I dive into their backstory to find out how they got where they are, what are some of the tips for you to do the same, and find out where they are going. Tune in every week as I interview more of the people you see every day. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice, where we release a new episode every Tuesday. I'm still excited that I have the new intro. So I had it on the last podcast, but if you missed that, we have it on this one too. So anyways, let me know what you think. voice@camanocoms.com. Love to hear what you guys think about that. And anything else, like if you guys have suggestions or just comments or anything else, I'd love to hear from you guys. All right. So today I got to interview Eric Watilo, who is the retired regional director for Washington State Parks. So he was also a park ranger and kind of worked his way up, actually really worked his way up from being a temp employee of the Washington State Parks or a temp ranger, and then all the way to being the regional director. So kind of the whole gambit. And in that, he lived all over Washington State, including on the peninsula, some of the San Juan Islands, Eastern Washington, all over the state. And so at the peak of the time that he was the director, he had about 240 some odd people that were working below him. And in that, most of those people are working, it's not like a corporate business where there's a lot of people working in one central area. But instead, these people were scattered all throughout Washington State. So we get into kind of how did he keep up morale, communication, and keep an overall team spirit across so many people across such a distance. So we get into all of that and more. He also was the director during some very difficult financial times for the Washington State Parks. Anyways, we get into how did he handle all those different situations and that. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Eric Watilo. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice. Today I'm here with a retired park ranger. Welcome to the podcast, Eric Watilo.
Thank you very much, Brandon. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So before we get started, tell us a little bit about Eric.
I was raised in Southern California, born in 1954, and stayed in the Long Beach area of Southern California until I was about 21 years old, something like that. Had two siblings, a younger sister, younger brother. Parents were both teachers, mom an elementary school teacher, and dad a music teacher in high school and junior high. Growing up, I played piano and cello, and by the time I got into high school, cello just wasn't so cool, so I sort of quit it. And about the same time, I became interested in the rock group The Who, so from cello to The Who.
Nice. Very cool. And when I was doing my research for this podcast, I found out this isn't your first podcast.
It's not my first podcast?
No, I saw another interview you had online. It was in like 2014. It was a long time ago.
Oh, Brandon, you're trusting my memory.
But yeah, I found you. I think it was a podcast that's based on like park rangers and
Right. Yeah. A former colleague had started a a podcast called the Park Leaders Show.
Okay.
And so he reached out to people in the field from all over the country and I believe Canada as well, national parks, regional parks, state parks, county parks, and just did different interviews on their areas of expertise. And it's to me, I've provided the link to a number of people who are coming up in the field of parks and recreation because I just found great value in that.
Yeah. Well, and it was neat going into my research. Like, he's been doing it since way back then, and at least he's released episodes in this year. So, like, he's still going with it.
Yes. Excellent.
So it's really cool. I love seeing podcast shows that just have continued to go because it's I've seen a lot of shows kind of start and then end. So it's neat to see ones that have just been going for so long.
Yeah.
It's very cool. All right. So growing up in Southern California, did you do a lot of outdoorsy things growing up then?
I didn't. I was pretty much living in a suburb. Had a number of people, guys my age, so we hung out together. But the most outdoorsy thing we did was when the weather warmed up, we would head to the beaches and lay out there and get blistered in the sun and body surf.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. So then, as you were getting to the end of high school then, did you go to college? And yeah.
I did. Right out of high school, I went to the local community college, Long Beach City College. At the same time, I moved out of my parents' house because I wanted to be independent, got an apartment, had a car, and realized I need to support that habit. And so got full-time work working in a film processing laboratory.
Wow.
And I noticed you squint. Film. Have you heard of film? It's back there, but like processing Kodak film, that sort of thing.
Wow.
Working the swing shift, taking a full load at the community college like all my friends did, and ended up dropping most of those classes because I couldn't do both.
Okay.
And so spent a second year at the community college, same deal, just kind of wandering aimlessly, wondering what I was going to do.
Yeah. So then what kind of, what would you decide to do then? How did you kind of spark that new interest?
So one of the classes I took at Long Beach City College was Field Natural History of Southern California. And it was a biology class, but it focused on the different biomes in California. So for a period of weeks, we would study the San Bernardino Mountains, and then we would take field trips out into the mountains. We would look at the mud flats in Southern California, study those, and then field trips there. Well, we did a study along the central coast of California and ended up at Morro Bay, California.
Okay.
And we were camping in Morro Bay State Park. And I recall that I had parked my car somewhere that was evidently not the legal spot to park. And a park ranger stopped by to chat with me. And we just started talking. He, politely asked me to move my car, and we started talking. And the more we talked, I started to interview him about, so now wait a second, you get to live in this beautiful place, work in this beautiful place, and talk to people about nature and how they interact with nature. That's what initially sparked my interest.
Okay.
A few weeks later, and this is a sort of a bizarre side note, a friend of mine, we were trying to figure out what we were going to do the upcoming Friday. And he says, hey, you want to go see this seer that my mom goes to? And I said, what's a seer? And he says, oh, sort of like a fortune teller. I said, oh, what the heck, got nothing else going on a Friday night. So he made an appointment with her, and we ended up going, and I sat with her, and she laid cards out on the table, literally. And but at one point she says, I see you in a uniform, but not a military uniform, and in kind of a Jeep type truck. So that was just a little side note. And I thought, okay, all right. So anyway, it was that conversation with the ranger that led me to say, this is what I think I want to do. And so I got out of the apartment, moved back home to my parents' garage, knuckled down in my education at the community college, took all the courses I needed to transfer to a 4-year college, and finally received my 2-year degree after 4 years.
Very cool. All right. So then, just jumping back real quick, because I have forgotten a lot of my science and biology classes. What can you remind me? What are biomes again?
Boy, I probably can't, but essentially, my recollection is it's the entire temperature, food chain interactions. I know this is the wrong definition, and your listeners are going to say he has no idea what he's talking about. But for lack of a better word, it was essentially the environment, like I said before, of the mountains, the animals, plant life that were involved there.
Okay.
So that's my best
Yeah.
guess at recalling what a biome
Yeah.
is.
So it's kind of like a step back, one step back from ecosystem. It's like a step above that.
Yeah, and in fact, ecosystem might even be a better word for what we were looking at. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So when you were looking to transfer to a 4-year, then what was at that point? What was your degree you were kind of looking at?
I thought, okay, I want to be a forest ranger, so let's find schools that have forestry. And so I found Humboldt State University in Northern California, Arcata, California specifically, and transferred up there, started my classes, and very soon realized that, wait a second, forestry classes are all about forest production. This is not what I wanted. And so essentially, estimating the yield of a certain stand of trees, harvesting, surveying, that sort of thing. And the courses I took were all helpful, but I then changed into what was called resource planning and interpretation,
Okay.
which is essentially a general natural resources degree. So it was well suited to, in fact, a lot of the graduates from this program ended up in fields like fish and wildlife, parks and recreation, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. So, so as you were kind of going through that degree, was everything kind of lining up more or less of what you were expecting now?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yep.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what did you do once you got once you graduated?
So when I graduated from Humboldt, my girlfriend, now wife, my girlfriend at the time, moved down to Southern California, and I was posted to a seasonal job at Del Norte Coast Redwood State Park,
Okay.
just south of Crescent City, and as a seasonal interpreter, which was a great job, especially since Redwood National Park had recently been established, and so Del Norte and a couple of other state parks up there were surrounded by Redwood National Park.
Okay.
And the reason it was such a great job was I got to work with national park interpreters. National Park Service at the time had budget for interpretation. State parks didn't have a lot. So we got to work in teams, and I got to utilize some of their resources, which was a great benefit.
Yeah. And what's the job of an interpreter for that?
Essentially, interpreting, just like any interpreting, you're trying to help somebody understand. If they speak a different language is one example of an interpreter. Here in natural resources, it's putting what's happened or happening in the natural resources world into words or examples that the park visitor can understand.
Okay.
Yeah, so it helps them to relate in some way, shape, or form. And, when you're talking to the general public, you have a wide range of audiences. Something that may resonate with you is not going to resonate with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to speak to the different audiences and be prepared to do that.
Yeah. So when you were getting started then, were you working as an interpreter or were you working just alongside them?
I was actually working as an interpreter that first summer for California state parks, but with national park interpreters.
Okay.
Yep.
So what was that for you? Like, had you done where you did a lot of speaking and stuff like that to other people?
That's part of what the class work was all about.
Okay.
Yeah, there were classes in interpretation. There were classes in relating to various people, different demographics, that sort of thing. So that was kind of what all the training was. And of course, in the classwork, you practice on each other, that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Nice. So once you got into the field, did it feel pretty natural for you to just jump right in?
it did. It did. Yeah.
Nice.
So I definitely realized that conversation with the park ranger. So, down in Morro Bay, just led me on the right path.
Yeah. Very cool. So where did you go from there then?
Well, my wife, or my girlfriend at the time, had ended up in Morro Bay, California, Central Coast of California. Her parents had a summer home there, and she was living there because she wanted to finish her degree at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And these two cities are pretty close together. And so I followed her down there, and then started looking for work. Here I was with a 4-year degree in resource planning and interpretation, and couldn't find a job, and finally did. And it was working for a recycling firm where I would go to a local grocery store parking lot. On Monday, an empty semi-trailer would be sitting there, and as people would come in, I would weigh their aluminum cans, throw them in the back, pay them some cash. And this is what I did for a full-time job, Monday through Friday. Come Friday, I did not enjoy the aroma coming out of that trailer. Stale beer, stale soda, stale juice. So I did that for a short period of time. And then a friend of mine from state parks was now working up at Hearst Castle, which is a state monument, Hearst San Simeon State Monument in California. That is north of Morro Bay, California, where we were living.
Okay.
And I got a job as a tour guide at Hearst Castle.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was put through a crash course, 2 weeks, to learn all I could about the art in the castle, the Hearst family history, including Patty Hearst and her history, that sort of thing. And then would lead tours of anywhere from 50 to 20 people through the castle.
Nice.
Yeah.
And did everything come, I guess your kind of skill set that you had been working on already with the forestry and the interpretation probably all came back into play as far as you were able to tailor all the information that you had already received down to whatever level you were working with, right?
Yeah, it certainly helped. The artwork, no, I didn't have a whole lot of training in the artwork, but they did a good job of training us to at least appear that we knew what we were talking about.
Nice. So during this time then, your girlfriend at the time, was she still working through her degree and stuff then?
Yes, yeah. She, like I say, was at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And we got married while we were down there.
Okay.
And decided that about that same time, I had applied for a California State Park Ranger position.
Okay.
And so I had taken the written test, taken the physical test, and it came to job interviews. I was not selected for interviews because at the time I was not within the demographic that California was looking at. They wanted to diversify their workforce in state jobs and especially state parks. And so we talked and said, we need to do something a little different. So we moved back to Northern California, Humboldt County.
Okay.
We decided that we would put me through a police academy because most state park systems require their rangers to be certified in law enforcement skills.
Okay.
And thought if we put myself through that would give me a leg up on some others that may not yet have the training, save the state some money in law enforcement training. So we moved back to Northern California. I had been working seasonally for California state parks. Besides the Del Norte, even when I was going to Humboldt State before I graduated, at Humboldt Redwood State Park, which is the Avenue of the Giants. You may have heard of it.
Yeah, I've driven through there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So worked seasonally down there, as did Carol, and connected with them, and they said, yeah, you can live in one of our seasonal housing if you volunteer so many hours while you're going to school. And so Carol and I were able to meet that. She continued back at Humboldt State University again to finish her degree while I was going to the police academy at College of the Redwoods.
Okay. How was that? Because you're stepping into a very different world of the people that are going through that, I would assume. How was that for as far as entering into that classroom and all that?
It was actually not a problem. The number of years I'd been working seasonally for California State Parks, once I decided that park rangering is what I want to do, I was around park rangers all the time.
Okay.
And knew what their requirements were, knew what their annual training, everyone was carrying a sidearm, and they'd come back to the office and sometimes share what issues they'd been dealing with. So it wasn't a surprise.
Okay.
Plus, there were a number of people in this police academy that also were hoping to become park rangers or fish and wildlife officers.
Okay.
Yeah, so it wasn't a totally black and white different, street police officer.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. So, as you worked through that, and then as you were graduating that, what happened next?
So, let's see. Had my degree in law enforcement. A friend of mine from college had moved to Washington State.
Okay.
And he said, hey, Washington State Parks is advertising for park rangers. You ought to apply. And so I did. And they said, hey, come on up for an interview. If you pass the interview in the morning, if you pass the written test in the morning, then we'll give you an interview in the afternoon. And so that's what I did, stayed with this friend of mine. Carol stayed back in Northern California. And a few weeks later, received the results. And a couple of weeks after that, received a phone call saying, we have a seasonal ranger job for you in Washington State Parks. And I said, okay, the park manager will call you. Park manager called me and he says, have a position that we'd like you to come work for us in Vantage, Washington.
Yeah.
And I thought, Vantage, Washington. Okay, I'm not familiar with it, but okay. And I said, can you kind of describe the area? And he says, well, it's sort of a dry desert environment. Well, Brandon, you have to understand that my experience in Washington has only been Western Washington. And so my interpretation, if you will, of what he shared was, that must be like a dry pine forest or something like that. So it was time for me to report to work, May 1st, 1983, and I kissed my wife goodbye. She still had some schooling to finish up. Drove my little Volkswagen up and followed the map because there was none of this Google direction at the time. Started driving through eastern Washington thinking, okay, I took a wrong turn somewhere. This is like Utah. But got to Ginkgo and got oriented, and it's Ginkgo Wanapum, Ginkgo Petrified Forest, which I thought was just fascinating. Mm-hmm. They put me up in a stone house that was constructed by the Civilian Conservation Corps back in the 1930s.
Wow.
Again, I felt honored to be able to live there and thoroughly enjoyed the first part of my career at Ginkgo. Found out that there were rattlesnakes all over this park. And being from Southern California suburbs, I thought, rattlesnakes? If a rattlesnake looks at you, you're done. The next thing they bite you and you're on your way to the hospital. Well, within the 2 months I was at Ginkgo Wanapum, I learned how to pick them up with a little pickup stick, put them in a garbage can, take them to the outside boundaries of the park, dump them, and I was on my way.
Oh. So what was that like the first time that a ranger or someone told you, like, no, this is part of your job and you have to do this?
Well, specifically the rattlesnake or anything?
But the rattlesnake.
Okay. Well, it was okay. Show me how to do it. I mean, this is part of the job. I'll get to it. But what also helped me was my background in interpretation and wanting people to understand their relationship with the environment. wildlife, plants, that kind of thing around them. All over the park were these bright red danger rattlesnake area signs. But we didn't anywhere in the park, and there's even a visitor center, an interpretive center, dealing with petrified wood in this park, nothing about rattlesnakes. And so I asked permission to do an educational panel on rattlesnakes, and that they allowed me to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, that was part of the job to move the snakes, but at the same time, I kind of turned a little bit and was able to learn more about rattlesnakes for myself and the public. For example, I learned that rattlesnakes tend to den on south-facing rock slopes.
Okay.
And that CCC structure I told you about I lived in was built on a south-facing rock slope. So after I learned that, where I used to just go bounding up the walkway into my house when I got off work at 11 o'clock at night, I now walked very slowly with a flashlight.
All right. So, so you were staying up there then. What happened as you were kind of going through that then? When did you transition either to continuing to stay up there or what happened next?
So I was there at the right time. Within 2 months, there was an advertisement for a permanent ranger position, because again, this was seasonal, permanent ranger position at Lake Wenatchee State Park. And so I applied for that and thought I would go up and check out the park the night before my interview, because I hadn't even seen it. Drove up through Leavenworth and Tumwater Canyon, and here I'm coming from this desert environment into that environment thinking, this is nice. I could do this. And then got to the state park, and I had requested that I go on patrol that night while I was camping with whoever was on duty, just to get a better feel for the park. Well, it turned out I was on patrol with the park manager.
Okay.
And so we had a chance to chat even before the interview, got to know each other. By the end of his shift, he says, "You want to come over and meet my wife and have a beer?" And so had the interview the next day and got the position. And,
nice.
Yep. It was a great experience. And in Washington, doors just continued to open up and open up. A year and a half after I'd been in Washington State, California State Parks called up and said, "We have a job for you at Humboldt-Redwood State Park. You want to come back?" And I said, "Sorry, Washington's been too good to me."
Very cool. So was that, because you hadn't really been up to Washington other than you came up for the temporary thing. Was that, how did your wife, how did your wife kind of take to all of that of deciding, hey, we're moving up to Washington?
Yeah, so she was raised in Southern California. We met at Humboldt State University up in the Redwood country. We had visited friends in Washington even prior to that job interview where I stayed with the one friend. So we had Thanksgiving with them a couple of times. So we had been to Western Washington. Also, her family did a lot of backpacking when she was a kid up in the mountains.
Okay.
And that Morro Bay place on the beach, that was her favorite spot, still is, in the world. So moving north to a place like Western or Washington State, she was all for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Very cool. So, so you got the position, the full-time position in Washington State, and that was based out of Wenatchee, but
actually it was at Lake Wenatchee State Park.
Okay.
So we had housing in all the parks we lived in. We had housing within the park. So the various parks are managed by regional offices around the state, and the regional office was in Wenatchee. But we lived right there at Lake Wenatchee State Park. The closest town was Leavenworth, a half hour away.
Yeah.
And so we would do some visits to Leavenworth, but most of the shopping was down in Wenatchee that had more to offer, if you will.
Yeah.
You can only get so many nutcrackers.
So, what happened next then? You were working for this in this position for a while. Then where'd you go next?
Yeah. So in Washington State Parks at the time, you could not promote within the state park. It was that you were working at. You generally had to move to another state park. And promotion meant more responsibility, but also more a greater salary. And we were starting a family. Our first child was born while we were at Lake Wenatchee, and so I promoted to Squim Bay State Park over on the Olympic Peninsula. And we were there at Lake Wenatchee. We were there for about 2 years. Squim Bay State Park for a little over 2 years.
Okay.
That was a little different dynamic because we were closer to the city of Squim, and so within 15 minutes we could be in town, and discovered for the first time in our lives 24-hour grocery store. Oh my goodness. So that was a bit of a benefit. And we enjoyed exploring the Olympic Peninsula. Wherever we lived, we enjoyed exploring. Our second child was born while we were at Squim.
Okay.
And then from there, interviewed for a position at Moran State Park in Orcas Island.
Okay.
Again, a promotion, and got the job over there, and again, got to live in a CCC built structure. This was a log building, open beam ceiling, stone fireplace, stonework. And I think a lot of your listeners, as well as yourself, are familiar with what the Civilian Conservation Corps did back during FDR's era. That whole program was set up to give young men work to send back home during the Depression.
Okay.
And these people from all walks of life learned a trade to be able to build these structures that are now throughout many of our national parks,
Okay.
our state parks, our regional parks, and they're a legacy. And to be able to live in one, again, was an honor. So,
Yeah.
so we were at Moran for about 5 years. And had interviewed for a position, for the manager position there, and did not get that, and thought, well, maybe I need to practice on my interview skills. So we interviewed over in Eastern Washington for a position at Lincoln Rock State Park.
Okay.
And I felt like I flubbed the interview, but kept talking, and they kept asking questions, and we got the job there. And so we moved to Lincoln Rock State Park, and that was, again, a promotion. A larger area consisted of a couple of parks that I was responsible for. And so that drew an end to our living in parks.
Okay.
From there, we were there about 5 years. From there, I had interviewed for a position in Burlington, Washington, at the Northwest Region headquarters for an assistant region manager position.
Okay. Nice. So what was the assistant regional manager position then?
Well, there are actually 3 different assistant region managers
Okay.
for the region manager, and one person was in charge of finances, one person was in charge of maintenance, and my position was more in charge of the operations of state parks. And so each of us would supervise different park managers, but the overall responsibility for the park operations, I would often kind of be the lead on, if you will. So it was essentially being the link between the region manager and the parks and what they were doing for public service.
Okay. Nice. So then when you moved into that position, was that over a lot? Would you, like an org chart, whatever, would you be considered like over these different groups and stuff, or was it just mainly the communication piece to it?
Communication piece, except I did have about 5 park managers who were my direct reports.
Okay.
The maintenance assistant region manager had 5, and the finance assistant manager had 5, or whatever the number was.
Yep. So how did that, when you were kind of managing, these people are all kind of all over the state then,
Yeah.
How did you kind of maintain team unity and just kind of keep morale and all of that?
So let me continue just a little
Okay.
bit if I can. So eventually the region manager retired. I interviewed for the region manager position.
Okay.
And the reason I want to go this route is I have a little better illustration to get to your question. So he retired. I got his position, and it was changed to a region director position.
Okay.
And what was once just in charge of park operations in the Northwest region turned into park operations and parks development, which is more the folks that design new parks, the folks that will contract out for sewer, water, remodeling, that kind of thing. And so the region director was overseeing all of this.
Okay.
So at the height of that position, I probably had, if you include the seasonal park aides, 245 people under my chain of command.
Okay.
Now, these were not my direct reports.
Right.
Okay. Under that structure of region director, I only still had about 6 direct reports.
Yeah.
And so your question goes back to, how did I communicate? How did we keep morale going? Well, it really depended on how I communicated with my direct reports and shared what I wanted to see.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I was sharing with them what my supervisor in Olympia wanted to see. These direct reports would then work with the park managers under them, and then get it down to their staff.
Okay.
So that's the messaging component of it, but there's a lot more as far as morale goes. I would schedule regular visits at least once a month to every park. And
Wow.
at the height, because state parks reorganized a number of times over the years, and just when I got into the region director position, they eliminated a regional position and divided it and combined it into 2 other regions along with the parks we already had.
Okay.
So there were probably 24 parks I was overseeing.
Okay.
Okay. So I would go out and visit these parks, walk through with the park manager, chat with staff as I saw them. But I would also show up unannounced. And I would just wander through and see staff doing what they do and just introduce myself and chat with them. The campground hosts, the volunteers, the same thing. And lastly, I think what helped morale, in my mind, and of course I'm the guy thinking, hey, I'm promoting morale. I have no idea what they said. But I would ask them to assign me to work a Friday or evening shift alongside one of their staff.
Okay.
It could be a seasonal park aide. It could be a park ranger. And so I was with them cleaning restrooms. I was with them picking litter. I was with them on patrol in the campground. Again, wanted them to understand that, hey, I came up through the field. I understand what you're doing, and tell me what you're thinking. What do you think of this job, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And do I have time for one
Oh, yeah.
anecdote?
Yeah.
Washington state budget has gone through all sorts of cycles through the years. And at one particular low time, state parks was not receiving a large part of the budget pie.
Yeah.
And so it was important to me that our staff, all the way down throughout the chain, understand that we need to be doing better on making sure our customers not only come, but have a good time, come back.
Yeah.
And so I came up with this little poster about the size of a bumper sticker. And what it said on it was, what will you, and you is capitalized and underlined, what will you do to enhance, and that's underlined and capitalized, a visitor's experience? What will you do today to enhance a visitor's experience? And these were posted just as staff walked outside their shop door or their office door, because I wanted them to think about that. And periodically I would hear stories about, wow, I helped somebody find their campsite. You would assume that that we were doing that anyway, and in many places I assume we were or thought that we were. But there were, I guess, these random acts of staff kindness that seemed to resonate, and I still hear about it to this day, that people are still having those posted in their offices. So
That's great.
I think that helped in morale some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so there's a lot of things that you said in that I think are very important. You were very intentional from the top down to make sure that you interacted and saw the people that work, because in a company you've got all these different layers that you're working through, and you're trying to have little touches here and there with all your team. But it's hard. There's a lot of work that you're doing because you're at the top. There's a lot of different things you're doing. But that's difficult in a business where you're all in the same building. And you're talking about doing this in a regional over the land area of a whole state.
Yeah.
And I think it's always encouraging to me to see that no matter what your land area is, no matter how you're leading, you can always make that a priority. You can always make sure that your team feels needed, wanted, and encouraged.
Yep.
I was wondering about that too, because you were kind of the manager or the regional director during some of these like crazy financial times. How did you kind of help encourage your team and stuff during those times? Because like it's not something that you're in control of. Like you can't work harder to sell more something to keep the staff. It's out of your control.
Yeah. Certainly, it was maintaining communication. There were some difficult times where permanent staff had been offered seasonal positions because we had to eliminate. So it was, you could share what was on your heart, that you were sorry these things were happening, but that only goes so far when it's somebody who has been in a permanent position for a number of years, has now been offered a seasonal position. So I don't know that I really encouraged people, other than there may have been messages that we will get through this. But again, to the person that was being directly affected, I'm not sure how much comfort that was. We certainly tried to, when we could, and we did do this in a number of parks, was close off some areas that perhaps, that doesn't bring in any revenue, and yet you are, your staff is out there cleaning that restroom, your staff is out there maintaining these areas. Let's close these off. Does that make sense? At the same time, the public is still going to go into these areas. They may not be able to drive into these areas, but they're going to walk. They're going to want to use a restroom where no restroom exists. So, tried to meet that fine line to keep things safe and sanitary, but at the same time reduce costs and reduce the burden on the staff and say, you don't have to do this every day in this particular area.
Yeah.
So that's some of the things we tried to do.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's an important piece of leadership as well. I think, I feel like in general I'm a upbeat person, and so I try and make everyone upbeat and stuff like that. But there are times, we've gone through it in the last 2 years, where it's not about making someone happy or upbeat again. It's more being with them. And
Yes.
Kind of experiencing it with them and saying it's okay to be upset right now. It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
So that's very cool. So in the time that you've obviously gone all over Washington State, what are some hidden areas that you really like that people maybe wouldn't generally go and explore and stuff like that? I
think one of the first ones that jumps out to me is Kukatali Preserve.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on the Swinomish Indian Reservation, and it was a collaboration, the first in the United States, between a state agency and the Swinomish tribe, or anti-tribe. And state parks and the tribe co-own and co-manage this preserve.
Okay.
And I think you said hidden gems or nice areas. This is out of the way. It's strictly a day-use park. There are quiet trails that lead you to beautiful views. It's a nice little getaway, and not that far from the Skagit Valley or your listeners, really. Well,
yeah.
Some of your listeners on Camano Island, yeah, it'll be a little bit of a drive. But another, I say Moran State Park on Orcas Island. It's not a hidden gem.
Yeah.
But again, we lived out there 5 years, and it has its hidden gems within it. There is a trail that goes from Cascade Lake, where we lived, goes up to Mountain Lake, and then up to Twin Lakes. And Twin Lakes are on the backside of Mount Constitution.
Okay.
I would leave the house in the morning with my fishing rod and lunch, and I would hike up this trail, hardly encounter anyone at all, get up there to Twin Lakes and fish most of the day for brook trout. It was just serene. It's just, yeah, again, you and the trees and of course the trout most of the time. So, no, that's a nice little getaway for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, there's Washington is. I mean, there's a lot of. I guess some states have some nice hidden things, but I feel like Washington has such a broad range of climates, environments, and everything.
Yeah.
Especially as you get through the San Juan Islands and stuff like that, you just get these weird weather patterns and climates, like microclimates, and they're just things that you won't. Even if you live in bigger states or other states along the ocean, you're not going to see some of those things.
Yeah. You mentioned the San Juan Islands, and a couple of gems over there are state parks. Susha Island State Park and Jones Island State Park. You have to have a boat or access to a boat, kayak, to get out to these things. But they're magical once you get there, and that was one of the benefits of my job was, I'd contact the park manager and I think I need to go see the islands. and it was part of my regular park visits, but I always enjoyed going out there and just interacting with the visitors and what was there. So that was nice.
Very cool. All right. And then do you have a favorite memory or story of being a park ranger?
Boy, there are so many different memories. One of my favorites, I think, is just walking through the campground on a Saturday morning, smelling the coffee and the bacon, seeing families, grandma and grandpa with grandchildren, or aunts and uncles, or whoever, or friends gathered around the campfire, just starting their day and just talking, just interacting. They're going to go out and do things or stay right there, but that to me was really my favorite memory. Not one single memory, but just that general category. That's what I enjoyed about it.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, I always enjoy camping. We like hiking and doing the more intense type things as well, but our kids are young, so we're still not quite there yet. But I think camping is a very it's always fun because it's there's always the aspect of something always gets forgotten.
Yes.
And so you always have to figure out a way to fix a small problem.
Yeah.
That it's something you never encounter at home. But then you and the kids and everyone get to try and figure out okay, we forgot this part. How do we make this work?
Yeah.
And I think that's all part of the adventure of it.
Yep. No, many times as a park ranger, I would happen upon somebody who's never set up their tent before. or somebody who has forgotten this. And we would always try to help them out. Again, enhance their experience. But even without that thought in our head, just being a good public servant to make sure that say someone like you, the dad who is frustrated because he left something behind, we made it all better or helped to make it better.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Well, I like to end every podcast with some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So the first one is, what purchase of $100 or less have you enjoyed the most in the last 3 months?
Well, let's see. I've been doing some remodeling work at home, minor remodeling work inside, and so I haven't really enjoyed those purchases. But last Sunday, the ladies in my family were attending a bridal shower for our youngest daughter. And so I took myself out to a local brewery and bought myself a $6 Scottish ale.
Nice.
I enjoyed that.
Perfect. All right. Who is the most influential person outside of your family in your life?
There was an instructor way back at Long Beach Community College. Her name was Judy Ramos. And she was the one that was actually teaching that field natural history of Southern California. I was working the late nights, and I overslept during the final. And I showed up after the final was over. She understood my situation, and she allowed me, even though there were rules about you miss the final, you're done, or you miss the test, she let me take the test. And that's always resonated with me, that her kindness and understanding. And to this day, I remember that often.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very cool. Okay, this is a fill-in-the-blank question. I know this is weird, but I've always wanted to blank.
I've always wanted to design museum displays. Primarily museums that deal in history.
Okay.
Yeah, history just has always intrigued me, and this probably harkens back to my interest in resource interpretation. But I want to design, or always wanted to design, displays that would help people understand what they're looking at, or the context of the people who use these things, that sort of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. All right. Who is an interesting or fascinating person that I should interview next?
I have a friend that I met many years ago at our church. His name is Alan Mua. Now, I was working in state work. He was working for community college, and he had a good position with a good salary and benefits, and he was raising, he and his wife were raising their son, and he up and quit the job because he and his wife had decided to form a nonprofit to assist those who are recovering from drug and alcohol addiction. They actually set up recovery houses.
Okay.
And to me, it's, I'm sort of a, boy, I got to make sure that I have all the finances I need. And he just they both took this leap, and it's been very successful. I think he would have a lot of stories to share.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. And lastly, what piece of advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
That was a long time ago, Brandon. I think at the time, I would say always consider others first.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I did that at that age. And also just don't take risks, especially when it comes to health and safety, because I think I took a lot of those at that time, the young and invincible. So those are the two pieces I would give myself.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you, Brendan. I appreciated being here.
All right. And Islanders, I will talk to you on the next one. Well, a big thank you to Eric Watilo for joining me on the podcast today, and thank you for listening. If you haven't already, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us be found by other Islanders like yourself. And for more information on this episode, you can go to CamanoCommons.com/podcast. That's CamanoCommons.com/podcast. Thanks for listening and see you next time.